So imagine you're trying to explain the concept of gravity to someone roughly 1,400 years ago.
Good luck with that, right?
Right. I mean, if you sit them down and just tell them that the entire universe, like the sun, the moon, all these massive celestial bodies hanging right above their heads, are held together by invisible, unbreakable forces, their brain is going to immediately translate that into, well, magic.
Oh, absolutely. They're going to picture giant, invisible crystal pillars or something.
Exactly. Rising right out of the desert dirt, holding up this solid physical blue dome. And honestly, for centuries, that is exactly how people read the opening verses of chapter 13 of the Quran, Surah Ar-Ra'd.
Yeah, the mythological lens just automatically snaps into place.
You read the phrase unseen pillars, and you just assume you are stepping into a fairy tale. Like, okay, here's the mystical part of the text. Welcome to the deep dive, by the way. I'm playing skeptic today, looking at the traditionalist angles, and I'm sitting across from our resident rationalist strategist.
Glad to be here. And yeah, we really do have this ingrained habit of viewing ancient worldviews entirely through a lens of fantasy.
We really do. We treat them like they're just charmingly naive.
Right. The assumption is always that ancient civilizations just lacked the capacity to understand the mechanics of reality. So, they plugged the gaps in their knowledge with mystical beings and magic spells.
Crystal architecture holding up the sky.
Exactly. But our mission today and the sources we're unpacking for this deep dive completely shatter that assumption. When you strip away all that centuries-old mythological baggage from this specific text, you realize you aren't looking at magical spells at all.
No, not at all. Which is wild.
You're actually looking at a hyper-analytical blueprint for universal and social physics. It's incredibly precise.
Okay, but if I'm listening to this right now, my immediate skeptical thought is, well, even if they aren't talking about literal crystal pillars, it's still an ancient religious text, so it's supposed to demand blind faith.
That's the common assumption, yeah.
Like, you just believe what it says because it says it.
Mm-hmm.
But the stack of historical, linguistic, and philosophical sources we are diving into today completely upends that expectation.
It really does. It's basically the opposite of blind faith.
Right. This material isn't asking you for passive submission to a dogma. It's actively advocating for empirical evidence. It's pushing for societal evolution. It is demanding absolute intellectual autonomy from you.
It forces the reader to observe, to measure, and to think critically about the physical environment around them.
So no magic crystal pillars.
No magic. The unseen pillars mentioned in the text represent the invisible, rigid, mathematically precise laws of physics. Specifically, we're talking about orbital mechanics and gravitational pull.
Which is mind-blowing for the time period.
It's a direct reference to the unshakable stability of a divine system. But, to grasp how radically different this approach is, we have to start by decoding the language it uses.
We have to look at the very first letters, don't we?
We do, because the misunderstanding literally starts on line 1.
Okay, so the chapter opens with these disconnected letters. Elif, Lam, Mim, Ra. In the traditional Arabic categorization, they call these the Muqatta'at.
Right.
Now, leaning into my traditionalist persona here, if you walk up to an average scholar of these texts and ask what those 4 letters mean, you usually get a very mystical dismissal.
You get the unknowable secrets routine.
Exactly. You're told they are unknowable, passwords to the divine that human brains just aren't meant to comprehend. And it always felt a bit hollow to me.
It feels like a cop-out.
Yes. It's like finding a locked door in this sprawling architectural masterpiece and just shrugging and saying, well, I guess that's the magic room we aren't allowed to enter.
Which is a profound linguistic error. Treating those letters as mystical secrets completely ignores how ancient Semitic languages actually functioned on a daily basis.
They weren't just speaking in riddles all day.
No, of course not. And more importantly, it ignores how human language fundamentally works even today. I mean, think about modern corporate environments.
Okay, like office jargon.
Yeah. When you receive a complex legal document and the person who signs it has CEO or CFO after their name, you don't stare at those letters thinking they're a magical incantation.
Right, I know they're acronyms. I know CEO compresses this massive amount of hierarchical and functional information, chief executive officer, into just 3 quick, digestible letters.
Exactly. And ancient Arabic and Hebrew poetry utilized the exact same concept of linguistic compression. Disconnected letters were frequently used as shorthand by writers and orators.
Shorthand for what in this case?
In the specific context of this text, the sources indicate that Aleph, Lam, Mim, and Ra act as highly specific acronyms for the core attributes of the divine authority presenting the text.
Oh, wow. So they stand for actual words.
Yes. For instance, the letters compress attributes like Alim, the all-knowing, Hakim, the all-wise, and Rahim, the deeply merciful.
That completely changes the tone. It's establishing the credentials of the author right at the top of the document, like from the desk of the all-knowing, the all-wise.
That's a perfect way to phrase it. It's an executive summary.
It takes something that has been shrouded in incense and mystery for centuries and just grounds it in extreme practical reality.
It grounds it immediately in rationality. And right after establishing those credentials, the text introduces two foundational concepts that govern literally everything that follows.
Right. Al-Kitab and Al-Haqq.
Let's break those down, starting with Al-Kitab. The loose, common translation is usually just the book.
Yeah, and when people hear that, they immediately imagine a physical, dusty tome floating in the clouds, or some giant leather-bound thing on a pedestal.
Which structurally and linguistically misses the functional weight of the word. Al-Kitab translates much more accurately to a code of laws.
A code, like a legal framework.
Exactly. Think of it as a constitution or a comprehensive system of operating principles. It's the underlying algorithm of reality, and it is inextricably linked in the text to that second term, Al-Haqq.
Al-Haqq is another one that gets totally watered down. Usually you just see it translated as truth.
Right, which is a problem in modern English.
A huge problem. Because when we say truth in casual conversation today, it's highly subjective. Someone says, well, I'm just speaking my truth, which basically just means expressing their personal feelings or perspective.
Which is the exact opposite of what Al-Haqq means. In this context, Al-Haqq means the absolute truth or the ultimate standard.
The objective baseline.
Precisely. It is the unmoving baseline reality. It is the measuring stick against which every single thing in existence must be tested.
So whether you're measuring the external physical universe, like the orbit of a planet, or the internal dynamics of a human economic system.
Al-Haqq is the absolute metric for all of it. If a biological system or a human societal structure aligns with Al-Haqq, it functions perfectly. If it deviates from it, it is structurally flawed and will mechanically fail.
Okay, but wait. This is where my internal skeptic starts throwing up massive red flags.
Let's hear them.
Why should anyone inherently believe that this specific code, this Al-Kitab, is the ultimate standard? I mean, human history is completely saturated with brilliant thinkers, philosophers, and sociologists who drafted incredible systems.
They drafted great theories.
Right. So why shouldn't we assume this is just the subjective intuition of a highly intelligent ancient philosopher? Why is this one document elevated to the level of objective, absolute cosmic truth?
The text actually anticipates that exact skepticism. It doesn't hide from it. It actively addresses it by drawing a massive, impenetrable line between human intuition and what it calls revelation, or wahi.
Okay, so how does it differentiate them?
It presents an argument about the fundamental limitation of the human mind. Human intuition, no matter how brilliant it is entirely a subjective creation of the mind.
But human intuition can be incredibly accurate. We have theoretical physicists who, intuit complex mathematical theorems in their sleep years before they can actually prove them on a chalkboard.
That's true, but why does the text write off that intuition as merely subjective?
Yeah, why elevate this wahi as the singular objective truth? What is the actual mechanical difference?
The mechanical difference is the source of the data and the environment in which it's processed. Even the most brilliant human mind is inevitably tainted by its environment.
We have blind spots.
Massive ones. A human philosopher's thoughts are constantly influenced by internal variables, their biological desires, their subconscious fears, cultural upbringing, economic status, the historical era they live in.
That is basically the definition of subjectivity.
Exactly. It's generated from the inside out, which means it carries all the baggage of the human condition.
So you're saying a human philosopher can never write a truly objective code because they are too tangled up in the very human system they are trying to fix.
You can't fix a machine while you are a gear grinding away inside of it.
That's a great way to put it.
The code, Al-Kitab, is presented as coming entirely from outside the human intellect. It is presented as wahi objective truth that descends upon the human from an external, perfectly calibrated source.
So no human bias whatsoever.
Zero. It carries no human emotional bias, no tribal affiliation, no economic incentive.
Okay, but that is a massive philosophical claim. I mean, anyone can claim their book came from outside the human mind. I could write a book tomorrow and claim that. You can't
Uh,
just assert that and expect a rational person to accept it, especially when the text claims to champion empirical evidence.
And it doesn't ask you to just accept the claim blindly. The text provides a historical, empirical test to prove its objective origin.
A test, like a challenge.
Yes, it issued a challenge that fundamentally altered human history. But to understand the magnitude of this, we have to look at the culture of 7th century Arabia.
The Arab Poetry Challenge. This is where the historical data intersects with the philosophical claim in a really fascinating way.
It really is. Set the stage for us.
So to understand the stakes here, you have to understand what language meant to the Arabs of that era. They weren't just casual speakers. They were the absolute, undisputed masters of rhetoric, linguistics, and syntax.
Language was their ultimate technology.
Exactly. It wasn't just a tool for communication. It was their science, their art, their primary cultural currency. They prided themselves on this unparalleled ability to compose intricate, structurally flawless verses entirely off the cuff.
Their entire societal hierarchy was largely dictated by linguistic prowess.
Yeah, they used to hold these massive poetry battles that functioned almost like modern geopolitical warfare. A single, perfectly constructed metaphor dropped in a public square could elevate a tribe to nobility.
Or completely destroy a rival tribe's reputation for generations.
Right, they were literal verbal gladiators. So into this highly charged, hyperliterate society drops this text, claiming to be wahi, objective truth from outside human capacity.
And how do the elites of that society react?
They immediately dismiss it. They say exactly what my internal skeptic just said. They say, this isn't divine, this is just the subjective invention of a very smart man.
And the text responds by throwing down the ultimate gauntlet. It doesn't beg them to believe it. It issues a highly specific, measurable challenge.
It says, if you truly believe this code is just the subjective creation of a human mind, then bring 10 chapters like it.
It challenges them to produce something, anything, that contains the same level of flawless syntax coupled with profound sociopolitical perfection, psychological depth, and universal truth.
It basically challenges them to reverse engineer the architecture of the text using their own human intuition.
Right. Prove it's human by replicating it.
But weight language is inherently malleable, right? Surely a team of the wealthiest, most educated, most brilliant poets in Arabia, given enough time, could have just reverse engineered the rhythm and syntax and faked it.
If the text was merely human, yes, absolutely. But they couldn't do it.
And how do we know for sure they couldn't?
The historical proof that they couldn't do it is found in how they reacted to the failure. They didn't just walk away and ignore the challenge.
No, they freaked out.
They were so utterly threatened by the undeniable objective superiority of the text, by the realization that their absolute mastery of language was entirely inadequate, that they chose an alternative route. They chose to wage war.
Which is insane. If someone challenges you to a poetry contest, and the alternative is a decade of brutal, bloody warfare, you just write the poem.
Right, you take the easy out.
You lock your best guys in a tent for a month, you pay them whatever they want, and you write the poem. You don't bankrupt your economy, risk your life, and tear your society apart unless writing that poem is structurally, fundamentally impossible.
The historical reality is that for 13 years in Mecca and then for roughly 7 years in Medina, they engaged in over 80 separate battles and military conflicts.
Over 80.
They subjected their own people to severe economic boycotts. They endured immense loss of life. They exhausted every conceivable physical, military, and economic option simply because the intellectual option was completely objectively closed to them.
They threw swords at it because their words failed.
That's exactly it. The violence was the empirical proof of their intellectual defeat. It proved in real time that the code's origin was outside human capacity.
Because no human mind, no matter how steeped in the rules of rhetoric, could forge the objective truth of wahi.
Right. The text proved itself to be Al-Haqq, the ultimate standard.
Okay, so we've established the origin. The text proves it isn't just subjective human philosophy. But if this code is the absolute standard for truth, how does it command us to look at the physical world?
That's the logical next step.
Because if it is truly objective, it can't just be an abstract philosophical document, right? It has to map perfectly onto the physical reality we can actually see and touch. It has to explain the sky as accurately as it explains human society.
And it does map perfectly onto physical reality. More importantly, it demands that humans actively observe that reality. It explicitly rejects passive observation.
So no blindly accepting things.
Never. It demands the empirical observation of what it terms the unseen, which brings us directly back to the phrase unseen pillars in verse 2 of Surah 13.
Let's read the physical environment through the lens of this text. The verse states that the heavens are raised without any pillars that you can see.
And we talked about the crystal pillars earlier.
Yeah, put yourself in the shoes of an ancient reader for a second. You're standing in the desert. You look up at the night sky. You see these massive, heavy objects, the moon, the stars, just hanging in a void.
And human logic dictates that heavy things fall.
Exactly. So if they aren't falling and crushing you, there must be something holding them up.
The human mind naturally searches for a mechanical support structure. The text takes that natural human inquiry and completely elevates it. It was essentially 1,400 years ahead of its time.
Oh, so.
By explicitly stating that the heavens are raised without visible pillars, it is directly referencing the unseen, mathematically rigid laws of astrophysics. It is describing the force of gravity and orbital momentum.
So long before Sir Isaac Newton supposedly watched an apple fall from a tree to deduce the laws of motion, and way before Albert Einstein formulated the theory of general relativity and the curvature of space-time.
This text is telling humanity, the support structure is real, but it is invisible. It is a mathematical law, not a physical object.
It's basically an invitation to science. Look at these massive celestial bodies, millions of times larger than your entire planet. They are suspended in the void. They aren't crushing you. There are no ropes. There are no stone columns. What is holding them?
And the answer is the unseen pillars, the unbreakable, perfectly calibrated laws of physics.
Gravity is a pillar.
Yes, you cannot see gravity with your naked eye. You cannot touch it, but you can undeniably, empirically observe its effects.
The text is demanding that humans engage in the scientific method. It's saying the ultimate proof of the divine system isn't found in a magic trick or some supernatural anomaly.
Right, it's not about breaking the laws of nature to prove God exists.
The proof is in the flawless, unbreakable mathematical stability of the cosmos itself.
And this specific framing of the universe leads us to a profound philosophical critique of certain modern scientific frameworks, specifically the philosophies that often hijack the scientific method today.
You mean positivism and materialism? Let's define those for a second, just so we're all on the same page. If I am a materialist, I believe that only physical matter and its movements exist. There is no underlying spiritual or divine blueprint. Everything is just atoms bouncing around in the dark.
That's the basic premise, yes.
But how does this text critique that when modern science absolutely agrees that gravity exists? I mean, modern astrophysics confirms the unseen pillars.
Science is unparalleled at observing and measuring what we call the law of uniformity of nature, which is essentially cause and effect.
Okay, give me an example.
Science observes that if you introduce fire to combustible material in the presence of oxygen, it creates heat. Under those specific parameters, it happens every single time without fail. It is a uniform law. Science measures gravity with that same extreme precision.
Right. If I drop a hammer, it accelerates toward the ground at 9.8 meters per second squared. It doesn't float to the ceiling on Tuesdays. It doesn't turn into a bird. It's uniform. It's reliable.
The critique targets the philosophical leap that positivism and materialism make after observing that uniformity. Ah, okay. The conclusion they draw.
Yes, they observe this perfect, flawless uniformity, these incredible, unbreakable mathematical laws that govern galaxies. And they philosophically conclude that these laws exist by near random chance.
They acknowledge the law but deny the lawgiver.
Exactly. They completely deny the existence of a conscious lawgiver.
That feels like a massive cognitive dissonance. Let's modernize the analogy a bit. If I boot up a hyper-realistic, massive multiplayer video game and I walk my character off a cliff, my character falls.
Naturally.
I observe that the game has a perfectly consistent physics engine. Things bounce, things fall, water flows downhill. I don't sit there and assume that the digital pixels randomly evolve their own consistent gravity over millions of years.
Of course not.
I don't assume the code just spontaneously generated itself out of static on my hard drive. I know logically that a perfectly consistent digital physics engine requires an underlying code, and that code requires a coder. That is an incredibly apt analogy. The sources argue that perfect, unbreakable uniformity cannot be a random accident. A law, by its very definition, requires a controlling authority to establish it.
And to maintain it, right.
Crucially, to maintain it. If there is a rule that fire always produces heat, or that gravity always pulls mass together, there must be a continuous active mechanism ensuring that uniformity doesn't just randomly break down.
Otherwise, the universe would just glitch out.
Exactly. The existence of a perfectly calibrated law absolutely necessitates a controlling authority behind it.
Okay, so if we establish that the universe is governed by these flawless mathematical unseen pillars, and we agree that a flawless law requires a lawgiver, The immediate philosophical problem becomes who or what is balancing the equation?
How does this controlling authority operate?
Yes, because when human beings try to conceptualize an entity that controls the entire universe, our brains immediately default to anthropomorphism.
We project ourselves onto the divine.
We picture a human king just scaled up to cosmic proportions with a big white beard.
This is a critical juncture in our deep dive because the text explicitly uses a phrase that has been wildly misunderstood to support that exact anthropomorphic view.
Lay it on us.
It states that the authority is established on the throne, which in Arabic is istawa ala al-arsh.
Established on the throne. And man, people have taken that phrase so literally that it spawned entirely new genres of mythology over the centuries.
It really went off the rails.
Completely off the rails. When you read through some of the highly literal traditional commentaries from centuries past, you find these incredibly elaborate, almost cartoonish interpretations.
Many of them were actually borrowed and shoehorned in from older Judeo-Christian traditions.
Right. You have stories about God creating the universe in 6 days and then physically resting on the 7th day because he was exhausted from all the hard labor.
It projects human biological weakness like fatigue onto the infinite, which makes no logical sense.
It gets even stranger. You have historical descriptions trying to map out the physical dimensions of the universe based on this literal reading, claiming it's a giant multi-story building, and it takes a mythical bird flying at top speed for 500 years just to get from one ceiling to the next floor.
And what do they say about the throne itself?
Oh, there are literal descriptions claiming the divine throne is a massive physical chair held up by 7 giant mountain goats that are standing knee-deep in a cosmic ocean.
Giant mountain goats.
I am not making that up. Giant goats. And that literalism trickles down into deeply problematic physical manifestations in daily practice today.
Oh, absolutely.
You could travel to places today that claim to hold the literal physical footprints of the prophet preserved in mosques, and the footprints are inexplicably 2 feet long and embedded 2 inches deep into solid stone.
As if a human being was walking around wearing lead boots on wet concrete.
It's sheer absurdity.
And our sources emphasize that accepting these literal mythological absurdities destroys our capacity for intellectual autonomy.
It turns our brains off.
It completely contradicts the rationality of the code we established earlier. If you genuinely believe that the cosmos is held up by giant goats, you stop looking for gravity.
You stop doing astrophysics.
You stop questioning entirely. You replace the scientific method with blind superstition.
Which brings up another linguistic misunderstanding. We talked about the unseen pillars, but what about the terms malaika and sama? Because the traditionalist reading usually translates malaika as angels with literal wings flying around the sama, which is translated as the physical sky.
Right, another prime example of mythological projection. Let's dismantle those words.
Let's do it.
Instead of winged beings fluttering around in the clouds, the linguistic roots of malaika point to forces or potentialities. They are the natural forces and energies embedded within the universe.
So like electromagnetic forces, thermodynamics, gravity, those are the malaika.
Exactly. They are the mechanisms executing the divine law. And sama, while often translated as sky, structurally refers to height or vision, the elevated overarching system.
The broader perspective.
Yes. So the text isn't describing a magical kingdom in the clouds. It's telling humans that they must understand and harness the malaika, these immense natural potentialities, to reach the heights of the sama.
You have to master the forces of nature to build a prosperous society. It's an instruction manual for engineering and progress, not a fairy tale about winged creatures.
Precisely, which ties perfectly back into istawa ala al-arsh.
Right, so if established on the throne isn't a giant physical chair with a tired king sitting on it, what does it actually mean linguistically and conceptually?
Linguistically, arsh, translated as throne, denotes central authority or supreme control. Think about how we utilize that exact language in modern political science.
Like overthrowing a throne.
Exactly. If a group of revolutionaries overthrows a monarch's throne, it doesn't mean they literally broke into the palace living room and stole his favorite wooden chair.
Right, they aren't carrying a piece of furniture down the street. When someone takes the throne, they are seizing the apparatus of the state. They are taking control of the system, the military, the economy.
The throne is simply a metaphor for centralized power. So the divine throne represents the ultimate centralized control of all the universe's forces, all the malaika.
So when the text states that the authorities is established on the throne, it is establishing that the entire universe, from the smallest atom to the largest galaxy, is running under a single, unified, perfectly balanced system of control.
Yes.
But why is the singularity of that control so important? Like, why couldn't it be a pantheon? Why not a board of directors running the universe?
Because of the laws of physics we just discussed. If there were multiple competing authorities, two gods fighting over the steering wheel, so to speak, the physical laws would have competing variables.
Oh, that makes sense. Gravity might work differently in one quadrant of the universe than another.
The uniformity of nature would collapse into chaos. Istawa ala al-arsh guarantees that there is one flawless central authority ensuring the underlying code never glitches.
Okay, but whenever we talk about centralized control, especially ultimate infinite power, human history gives us a pretty terrifying perspective.
Lord Acton's principle.
Exactly. Lord Acton's famous historical principle. Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. In human social physics, whenever a single person or a single regime gains ultimate unchecked power, it is an unmitigated disaster.
Every single time.
They lose their psychological balance. They become intoxicated, paranoid, cruel, and corrupt. So how does the divine system wield absolute power without becoming a cosmic tyrant?
Because human beings corrupt under the weight of power because we do not possess a perfectly balanced personality.
We're messy.
Incredibly messy. Our internal emotional states are unstable. Our desires swing wildly between greed, fear, and ego. We are fundamentally subjective.
So the divine system isn't like us.
The divine system, the authority established on the throne, represents absolute infinite power wielded by a perfectly balanced personality. It is the very source of Al-Haqq.
The ultimate standard.
Right. It controls the unimaginable violent forces of the cosmos, supernovas, black holes, solar radiation, without a single millimeter of deviation, without a shred of corruption, and without any fatigue.
It never gets drunk on its own power.
Never. It is infinite power, coupled with infinite stability.
That is a staggering concept. Infinite power governed by infinite stability. It explains why the planets don't crash into each other. But this perfect, uncorrupted control doesn't just hold planets in place in a static, frozen way, does it?
No, the universe isn't a museum display. It is deeply dynamic.
This system determines the exact lifespan of every single entity in existence. Which brings us to the concept of the appointed term.
The text explicitly notes that this authority has subjugated the forces of nature, specifically mentioning that the sun and the moon are running for a term appointed.
Running for a term appointed. See, when people hear that, the mythological lens tries to snap right back into place.
They think of doomsday.
Exactly. Does this just mean the universe is a giant ticking clock winding down to a random, fiery apocalypse? Like, is the central authority just sitting there with a stopwatch, and in a billion years, he's just going to randomly blow the whistle and shut off the lights?
Yeah. That is another highly anthropomorphic mythological framing. It removes causality from the equation entirely.
So what does term appointed actually mean?
It refers to a strict scientific adherence to the law of requital, the absolute law of cause and effect. It means that everything in the physical universe has a mathematically determined lifespan based entirely on its physical properties and how it expends energy.
Break that down using the sun, since the text specifically mentions it.
Well, the sources point out that modern science can now measure the exact rate at which the sun operates. The sun is essentially a gigantic nuclear fusion reactor.
Right, constantly burning.
It's constantly converting hydrogen into helium, releasing massive amounts of heat and radiation in the process. We can measure the exact volume of hydrogen it possesses and the exact rate at which it burns that fuel.
Which means we can do the math.
Yes. Therefore, we know with mathematical certainty that it has a scientifically appointed term.
It has an expiration date.
Exactly. It is not eternal. It is operating on a strict physical budget. When the hydrogen fuel is depleted, its term is up. It will expand, contract, and eventually die.
It doesn't die because a magical whistle is blown.
No, it dies because the laws of thermodynamics demand it. That is the law of requital in universal physics. Cause and effect.
So it's not magic, it's thermodynamics. The text is saying, look at the sun. It seems eternal to your human eyes, but it's operating on a strict budget dictated by the unseen pillars.
But here's where the text makes a massive pivot.
Let's talk about the pivot.
It takes these grand rules of universal physics and maps them directly onto human society. It transitions into social physics.
Which introduces the concept of rububiyyat.
Yes, rububiyyat, the divine nourishment system.
Let's unpack that because it's a beautiful contrast. The universe is perfectly balanced to provide for all its components, right? The sun gives exactly the right amount of energy for life to thrive on Earth. The water cycle nourishes the soil.
That is rububiyat in the physical realm. The system flawlessly sustains its creation.
So the obvious question the text forces us to ask is, if the physical universe is perfectly balanced to provide for everyone, why is human society in absolute chaos? Why is there poverty, starvation, and systemic collapse?
And the answer the text gives is that we haven't aligned our social laws with these natural laws.
We are out of sync with the universe.
Completely out of sync. The Quran consistently uses the physical universe as an objective analogy for human society. Just as celestial bodies have a mathematically determined lifespan based on physical laws, human nations, empires, and societies have an appointed term based on social laws.
But how does a country have a thermodynamic expiration date? I mean, a society isn't burning hydrogen. How does a society have an appointed term?
A society burns social capital. A society's lifespan is not dictated by random fate. It is not dictated by how many ritualistic prayers its citizens perform or how many temples they build.
Rituals don't save you.
No. Its lifespan is dictated entirely by its alignment with the natural code of laws, Al-Kitab, the objective blueprint we discussed in the beginning.
So what triggers the end of that term? What is the actual mechanism of societal collapse?
The mechanism is injustice. If a society builds its structural foundation on economic exploitation, corruption, and the suppression of human rights, it is directly violating the laws of social physics.
Walk me through the actual mechanics of that, because I want to see the math on how economic exploitation causes a society to mechanically collapse, according to this law of requital.
Let's trace the cause and effect. When a societal system allows or encourages economic exploitation, wealth inevitably centralizes into the hands of a very small elite.
Right. That is the cause.
The mechanical effect is that the working class is systematically stripped of its purchasing power. When the majority of the population cannot afford basic necessities, economic velocity stalls out.
People stop buying things.
Industry shut down. Unemployment skyrockets. This leads to mass starvation, civil unrest, and a complete breakdown of infrastructure.
It's an algorithm. The elite exploit the base loses the ability to support the elite, and the entire pyramid implodes under its own weight.
Precisely. It's not a divine curse magically striking them from the sky with lightning bolts. It is the law of requital playing out.
The physics of society.
Its internal contradictions and injustices cause the society to consume itself. Its appointed term expires, and it collapses, making way for a new system.
It's like trying to build a massive skyscraper while completely ignoring the engineering principles of gravity. I mean, the building might stand for a few years, it might look shiny and powerful to the people walking by.
But eventually, the physics will win.
The internal stress will snap the steel, and the building will fall. You cannot escape the law of requital.
So, to build a society that doesn't collapse, to build a skyscraper that stands, humans need an objective blueprint.
We can't just wing it based on our subjective desires.
No. We need to clearly understand the relationship between the physical world we are trying to build and the underlying code that directs it.
Which brings us to one of the most profound linguistic, philosophical, and operational distinctions in the entire source text.
The difference between KHALQ and Amershiro.
Yes. The text uses the phrase, directing the affairs, which translates from the Arabic yudabiral amor.
KHALQ versus amor. I know we touched on the idea of blueprints earlier, but we really need to dive as deep as possible into this because this feels like the absolute skeleton key to unlocking how this entire system functions.
It is the operating system of reality. Let's strictly define the two words.
Let's start with KHALQ. It generally translates to creation. It refers to the physical manifestation of something in the perceptual world.
The realm of the tangible.
Right. It's what you can touch, see, measure, and weigh. The physical universe, our biological bodies, the steel bridges we build, the printed money in our economies, these are all KHALQ.
The solid stuff, the atoms.
Yes. But Amor is entirely different and arguably far more critical. Amor belongs to the conceptual world. It translates roughly to directive energy, the intent, or the blueprint.
So it's the idea before the thing exists.
It is the underlying law, the objective parameters that must exist before the physical thing can be successfully created.
To make this abstract concept highly concrete, our sources use this brilliant analogy of a potter.
It's a great visual.
Imagine a master potter sitting at a wheel. Before his hands ever touch the wet mud, before he even enters his workshop that morning, he has an exact mathematical vision in his mind.
He knows exactly what the shape of the pot must be.
Right. How wide the base needs to be to prevent it from tipping over, how heavy it will be, and what specific purpose it will serve. That conceptual vision, that flawless mental blueprint, That is the Emer.
And when he finally applies his hands to the clay and physically shapes it in the real world, the resulting physical clay pot is the KHALQ.
The physical KHALQ cannot possibly exist without the conceptual Emer preceding it.
Exactly. The sources also brought up a beautiful analogy regarding the famous philosopher and poet Allama G.A to explain this transition from potentiality to reality.
Oh, I love that part.
A poet feels a rhythm, a profound emotional truth, or a philosophical concept in their mind long before they ever pick up a pen. That unwritten, abstract conceptual feeling is the Emer.
And when they finally wrestle those feelings into human vocabulary.
Mapping them onto the physical structure of a poem printed on a page, that becomes the KHALQ.
It is the transition from invisible potential to visible reality. But to truly grasp the immense depth of the word ar and how it applies to our actual survival as a species, we have to look at its historical and etymological roots in the Arabic language.
What's absolutely fascinating is that the word arm originally referred to something extremely practical and life-saving for desert nomads.
The desert stones. This was honestly my favorite detail in the entire stack of sources. It removes the concept entirely from the realm of abstract philosophy and makes it literally about survival.
It really grounds it. Imagine you are traveling through a vast, trackless desert in 7th century Arabia.
Sounds terrifying.
There are no paved roads, there are no street signs, there is no GPS. It is a featureless, shifting terrain of sand dunes that look identical in every single direction.
If you wander aimlessly, you will die of thirst.
To prevent this, a highly experienced guide known as the Emir would go ahead of the caravan. He would place small stones or build little rock cairns at highly specific intervals along the safest, most direct route.
Marking the path.
These stones mark the oases, the safe passes, the path to survival. Those small guiding stones were literally called Emir.
Wow, so Amr literally means the markers guiding you through the chaos.
Yeah.
It's the breadcrumb trail to survival.
Precisely. So when the text talks about the divine Emir, it is referring to the directive energy, the objective markers and blueprints placed by the divine system to guide humanity through the trackless, chaotic desert of life toward a prosperous society.
That is profound. So how do we actually achieve societal evolution knowing this?
We achieve it when we force our physical reality to perfectly align with the objective blueprint.
When we align our KHALQ with the divine Emir.
Yes. When we design our economic policies, our justice systems, and our social structures by following those specific objective markers, society thrives. It reaches its maximum potential.
But what happens when we disconnect them? Because, it seems like modern society is incredibly good at KHALQ. We are absolute masters of the physical world right now.
Oh, without a doubt.
We build mega skyscrapers, we split the atom, we engineer artificial intelligence, we synthesize new chemicals. Our KHALQ is off the charts.
But if that massive physical capacity, that KHALQ, is completely divorced from the Amr, the objective moral blueprint, the Al-Haqq leads to absolute disaster.
Because there's no direction.
If we build massive economic engines, which is KHALQ, without the markers of economic justice and equity, which is the Amr, we get global poverty and systemic collapse.
They wander off into the trackless desert.
Exactly. Blinded by our own physical creations, relying purely on our subjective intuition, and society starves and eventually collapses. The appointed term expires.
It's like we are building faster and faster cars without ever bothering to pave a road or draw a map. It's just accelerating toward the cliff.
The universe demands alignment between the blueprint and the physical reality. The universe does not tolerate chaos, and it will eventually crush any system that attempts to operate outside of the objective code.
Let's zoom out a bit and look at the sheer scale of the journey we've just been on. We started this deep dive looking at an ancient verse that talked about unseen pillars and a throne.
It would have been the easiest thing in the world to dismiss it all as a collection of magical spells.
Right, and mythological giant goats holding up a flat earth.
But by refusing to accept the mythological lens and by applying a rigorous rational linguistic and historical analysis,
we uncovered a profound thesis on universal and social physics. We learned that the unseen pillars aren't magic. They are gravity, orbital mechanics, and the unbreakable laws of astrophysics.
We learned that the throne isn't a giant wooden chair for a tired king. It represents the absolute, uncorrupted, perfectly balanced central authority of the universe that ensures the uniformity of nature.
And we learned that the Code Al-Kitab isn't a dusty book of fairy tales, but the objective, mathematically precise blueprint for human survival and societal evolution.
We basically moved from a paradigm of blind, passive faith to a paradigm that demands active, empirical observation of reality.
But here's the wild part. Today, for this entire deep dive, we really only looked up.
We did.
We focused on the heavens, the sun, the moon, the forces of nature, and the grand rules of thermodynamics. But what happens when we bring this all crashing back down to Earth?
That is the teaser for our next exploration.
The very next verses in this code bring the focus aggressively back to the solid ground. If the heavens followed this strict, unbreakable social chemistry, what happens when we apply it to the Earth and the mountains?
How do the literal physical mountains mentioned in the text mirror the massive, deeply entrenched economic and political mountains in our own human society?
I honestly cannot wait to unpack that.
Yeah.
That's going to completely change how we look at human power structures and entrenched wealth.
It's a heavy one.
But before we wrap up today, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought. We've spent all this time discussing how the entire cosmos operates on a strict, unbreakable code of cause and effect.
Gravity doesn't take a day off.
The sun runs precisely to its appointed term. The universe demands absolute alignment between the conceptual blueprint and the physical reality.
It operates flawlessly because it follows its markers.
So, if the external universe is this perfectly calibrated system of cause and effect, to what extent are the chaotic, frustrating, exhausting parts of your own life simply the result of defying your own internal physics?
Are you wandering in the desert, ignoring the objective markers?
Exactly. Are you relying solely on your subjective desires and wondering why you constantly feel lost and exhausted? Maybe it's time to stop looking for magical pillars to hold you up and start understanding the laws of your own gravity.
Keep observing the unseen.
Thanks for taking the deep dive with us.